Morning, everyone. Hey, it's good to see you. Hey, we are moving through the book of John. If you're jumping in with us for the first week, I'm glad you're here. We've been studying the book of John in the first several weeks of this series, The Best is Coming. Looking at this idea that we are running towards Easter, that we are looking at Jesus coming back to this world, walking out of a grave, and it's going to be a great day. But studying what life looked like for Jesus moving through life in those moments. And we looked about how Jesus is coming to bring change. And when Jesus brings change, that really is what his kingdom was about, is that shifting and turning things upside down, changing a culture in ways that they were not expecting, and still doing that through us today. Last week we looked at this idea that Jesus is coming with authority. He's coming with authority, and as Jesus makes this claim of I and the Father are one, I and God are one, it would have rocked the Jewish leaders' worlds. It would have upset them. It would have frustrated them. It would have made them angry. All of the above, they would have not liked it, and we have seen that played out. And as we continue to where we're at today, we continue to see the Jewish people upset, mad at Jesus, the Jewish leaders looking for ways to arrest him, stone him, and kill him. And Jesus continues to march. He continues to say, this is who I am, this is what I'm about. This is who I am, and this is what I'm about. And then he illustrates that with the way that he lives and the way that he treats the people around him. When you look at Jesus' life on this earth, there is a characteristic of the people that Jesus oftentimes surrounds himself with. Other than the disciples, there are people that Jesus oftentimes is drawn to. There is a group of people that Jesus oftentimes sees in the middle of the crowd. And that group of people that Jesus oftentimes takes notice of, if you will, their characteristic is that of the broken. There's something in their lives that is broken. And it doesn't mean that they are, worthless and cast aside, even though society may tell them that. There is something in their lives that is not the way that it's supposed to be. Whether it's a physical condition, whether it's a spiritual condition, there are different conditions of their life that is causing them to live life in brokenness. And because of this, Jesus' eye catches their attention. You see, most of the time in the middle of brokenness is when we see Jesus' compassion and his healing power shine the brightest. But if we're to talk about our response to brokenness, if we're to talk about how we respond to people who are broken, and many times culture and society wants to say to step around, that it's an inconvenience, it will take a lot of time, it will require a lot from us, and so we step around. But when we look at Jesus' reaction, his response is not to step around, it's to step right into. And so maybe the question this morning is, when we encounter brokenness in our lives, or maybe even more so in the lives of people around us, what is our response? I want to pray. We're going to jump in. God, I'm thankful for your church. God, I'm thankful for the fact that we can be here right now. God, we can worship. God, we can celebrate. We can laugh. God, we can be together, and we don't have to pretend. We don't have to have everything together. But God, in this moment, we can just be us. And we can recognize that you see us for where we are. Father, I'm thankful this morning as we meet in this room. God, there's not one of us that's perfect. All of us are far from it. And it's because of your goodness and your grace that we are here right now. Jesus, I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that a room full of sinful people, God, we can get together and we can celebrate. It's in your name we pray. Amen. There are three types of people in the world. And although we're not Catholic, we're going to have a time of confession this morning. So I hope you're prepared. Okay? Hold on. Everybody's leaving right now. Okay? No, don't worry. There are three types of people in the world. I want right now for you to think of something in your house that recently has been broken. Okay? Maybe someone broke it for you. Maybe it's something that didn't work when you plugged it in. Something in your home, your world that is broken or was broken. Here are the three types of people in the world when it comes to that item. There are some of us in the room that we are the fix-it people, okay? If it's broke, right away, we get down and we fix it, okay? Whatever it is, we get tools out, okay? We get whatever color duct tape is needed and we fix it, right? All right, there are some of us in the room, we're the fix-it people. Group number two are the wannabe fix-it people, okay? We are the group of people that we set it on the counter or the shelf in the garage and we say, I'm going to fix it. But if we're to be honest this morning, which we're going to be because we're at church, that item is sitting there months later, isn't it? And it's still broke, okay? We're the wannabe fix-it people, okay? Group number three is it's broke. It broke for a reason. Something wasn't right with it. We're throwing it out and we're buying a new one, okay? That's group number three, okay? So if you fall in the fix-it, you actually fix it right then and there. If you're a fix-it person, raise your hand, okay? Yeah. This is some of us, okay? We are the fix-it right then, okay? Make it right. If we are the wannabe fix-it people, my hand's going up right now, okay? Yeah, the wannabe fix-it people. We have good intentions, don't we, friends? Yeah, we do. Okay, if you're in the category of it broke for a reason, go buy a new one. Yeah, okay, so there it is. Okay, yeah, we all respond differently, okay, to brokenness. This right here is a willow tree. My wife collects these. I didn't know anything about willow trees. She loves these, and I love her, and so they're all over our house. Okay, and we have some that she got when we got married, and we have some that when we had kids, and she has some that I didn't know what to get her for Valentine's Day, so I got her a willow tree, and it worked out. You know, we've got these for all different reasons, but this was one that because of the athleticism of my 5-year-old is now broken. Okay, he was practicing football in the house, and now we have a headless willow tree. Okay, here it is. Okay? And I would like to tell you that this willow tree just broke this past weekend. I would love to stand up here and tell you, yesterday Levi was practicing football in the house, and he broke this willow tree. But I'd be lying, and we're in church, so we're not going to do that. Okay? This willow tree has sat on my kitchen counter for more than a month. Okay? And it's not difficult to fix. Like, you don't have to be a handyman to glue 3 pieces back together. It's not tough. Okay? But every time I think of the glue that I need to put this back together that we are out of, you know what I remember? At 10:03. That's when you remember everything in Macon that you need, right? Okay, you're out of bread, you're out of milk, okay? You're out of laundry detergent, you have no clean clothes. Oh, it's 10:03, everything's shut down, right? So when we remember it all, I remember that I need this glue at 10:03 about twice a week, and I forget until 10:03 the next day. And so it sits, and I make excuses why I don't spend time and fix this. I could make a note. I could set an alarm on my phone. I could do a lot of things to respond to the broken in the right way, but I don't. And so it sits there, and it continues to be broke. And I continue to receive a loving reminder every once in a while of it's still broke on our counter. You see, we respond to brokenness in different ways. Culture that we live in wants to tell us when people are broken that it would be better to not inconvenience ourselves and to pass by. And a lot of times when we think of brokenness, we think of the person on the corner with a cardboard sign. That comes to our mind of someone who is broken. But if we're honest, there is something inside of each one of us this morning, men and women alike. And guys, it's true, so don't pretend it's not. There's something inside of us that's not right. There's something inside of us that's broken just a little bit. And maybe it's pride, and maybe it's sorrow, and maybe it's how we spend our time or what we do. Maybe for some of us, it's a struggle with a sin that we've kept secret. Maybe for some of us, it's a struggle with a relationship or our marriage or our parenting or someone at work or something at work. There is an area in all of us. There's an area in all of us that's broken. And so before we just want to assume, oh, well, it's someone else is more broken, because that's what we like to do, right? Now, I don't want to admit that I'm broken because that's a sign of weakness. I don't want to admit that I'm broken because that's a sign that I don't have it all together. And I'm supposed to have it all together, but I don't if I admit that. And so they're more broken. And so let's look at them, right? But Jesus doesn't see the more broken. Jesus just sees the brokenness of people. And instead of stepping around, Jesus steps into. What does this look like? If you brought a Bible, go ahead and open up to John chapter 9. John chapter 9 is where we're going to meet Jesus this morning. I mentioned earlier that Jesus is upsetting the Jewish people. Jesus is on the tail end of a giant feast, which was extremely important in the Jewish culture, which means that if he does anything, it's going to upset them. Again, he steps in and he does something on the Sabbath which upsets the people all over again. He brings explanation to it. They don't like it. And so he is exiting scene now with his disciples, except for one thing. There was such a ruckus where he was that when he leaves, he does not leave by himself. There is most likely a crowd with Jesus and his disciples as they leave in John chapter 9. And as they leave, Jesus is going to encounter a man that is experiencing brokenness. And within his reaction, we see what our response should be. John chapter 9, we're going to begin in verse 1. It says this. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him. Wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was. Others said, No, he only looks like him. But he himself insisted, I am that man. How then were your eyes open, they asked. He replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed. And then I could see. Where is this man? They asked him. I don't know, he said. Jesus encounters this man, and upon encountering him, he receives some questions from the disciples. You see, again, kind of like last week, we have to understand some of the Jewish assumptions of the scene to understand everything that's going on. And it was assumed that in the Jewish culture, if there was a physical ailment especially, that it was a result of someone's sin. And so if you saw someone that had a physical ailment, it was assumed that it was because someone in his family sinned, and there is now a punishment for that. And so the disciples, assuming this, said, who is it that has sinned? Jesus' response says, neither. This would have been hard for the Jewish people to understand. What do you mean neither? Someone has to have sinned. That's what caused this man to be blind. And Jesus responds and he says, no, it's happened that the works of God might be displayed in him. And now we can read this one of two ways. We can read this and we can read it as God caused this man to be blind for this very moment. Which is a little bit uncomfortable to think of, isn't it? I mean, honestly, like God caused this man to live this much of his life without sight because he was born this way, just for this very moment? Now, let me be clear. This is completely in God's power. Like, this is completely within the sovereignty of God, within his plan. Like, this very well could be. However, it's not the only way to read this verse. Well, Jesus is also responding. And while that could be the case, the way that Jesus is more properly responding is him saying, listen, I know he's blind. It's not because of sin, but no matter what caused him to be blind, I am happy, I am excited that he can be healed for God's glory in this moment. So because of this condition, because he's blind, more or less Jesus is looking at his disciples and he's saying, listen, I don't care how he got this way. I'm pleased that God will receive glory from his healing. There are broken areas in our life, friends, that are a result of choices that we made. But there are also some things in our life that are not a result of the choices that we made. They're just something that we have been dealt. Sometimes the circumstances and the difficulties, the broken areas of our life are not a result from our choices. They're just a result of a broken world that we live in. But here's the truth. Our difficulties and our broken areas are the display floor for God's beauty. Our broken areas are the display floor for God to work to show others who he is, which is exactly what happens with this man. Jesus bends down in the dirt and he spits in the dirt and he kind of mixes it up with his finger. And reading this, I'm thinking, Jesus, is there really no other way? Like, you've got everything at your fingertips and you're choosing to spit in the mud. Really? Again, some ancient Jewish history would tell us that many Jews believed that there was medicinal purposes within saliva. And so as Jesus does this, he's connecting with his audience, not casting them aside. Remember, he stepped right in the middle of it, and he's spitting in the mud, connecting with the people around him, and using this as a tool to continue to step into the people of his day, not around. He puts this mud on the man's eyes, and he says, go and wash your eyes in this pool of Siloam. And so he sends this man on his way. As this man walks and he washes his eyes off, he has received sight. Now, before we go into the neighbor's reaction, as he mixes this mud, this is the sixth sign in the book of John of who God is, who Jesus is, that there is power within him. And I think it's interesting if you look at what God made on the sixth day in creation. It's that he made man. He created man from where? The dust of the ground. And so as Jesus reaches down, the sixth sign of his power is that he reaches down to the dust of the ground and he creates new life within this blind man. Everything that this man would have known is about to change. He has never seen anything in his life, ever. He's never seen his parents' face. He's only heard their voice. He's never seen the house that he lived in. He's only been told about it. He doesn't know what his friends look like. He's just been told about it. And now, all of a sudden, he washes and he walks away from this pool, receiving sight. I don't know. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? It says that he goes home. He goes to his neighborhood. And can you imagine if you're the old lady next door and you watch this kid grow up and you watch his parents struggle every day to get him in and out of the house, and all of a sudden he walks up the front sidewalk and just opens the door? You're rubbing your eyes wondering if this is really happening. Can you imagine his parents? His mom is sitting in the living room. As the door swings open, she looks up and she sees her son, and he looks directly at her eyes and says, "Hi, Mom, how are you?" She probably would have fell out of the chair. As she looks back at her son, immediately her mind is flooded with all of the struggles of raising a blind child, of having to take him everywhere, lead him everywhere. When she taught him how to walk, she had to guide him so he didn't run into things. And she had to take him into the bathroom every time he had to go. She had to walk by his side. And whenever it was time to go out into the market, she had to hold on to him every place she went. And now all of a sudden, it's this very son that's walking into the front door and has received sight. It would have blown her mind from every angle. And so the neighbor lady, she starts to question. And the guy down the street that watched him grow up, he now begins to question. And they say, well, wait a minute, is this even the kid? Is this the guy that we watched grow up, that he just waltzes back into the neighborhood and now can see everything that's going on? Is this the guy? And there's this conversation, well, it kind of looks like him, but I mean, it can't be him. And finally the guy says, I'm the man. Like, that's me. I'm really the guy that couldn't see, and now I can see. And so then they ask him this question, well, who did this? Of course, his response is Jesus. And I want to pause here for just a minute. How many times when someone asks us about the broken areas in our life, whether it's physical or spiritual or even just conditional in this world, of when things have changed, what is it that changed that? How many times do we respond with Jesus? Well, I went to this really good doctor, and I mean, he's got a whole bunch of degrees, he's a smart guy, and so he was able to, help me figure this out, and so I'm thankful for him. We often will attribute healing, not just physical, but spiritual. Maybe some of us will attribute it to a counselor and the wisdom that they shared with us. And maybe some of us will attribute it to a doctor. And some of us will attribute it maybe to a parent that, we kind of talked to and talked us through. Some of us will attribute it to our spouse or even our kids bringing hope in the middle of a hard time. We will attribute it to lots of conditions around the world. And that doesn't mean that is not true. But how many times do we attribute healing to the power of Jesus? Most of the time, probably it's maybe a second or third option after what we see around us. But could it be that God used those individuals or those people to display his beauty and his healing power? I think it's interesting, the last question that they ask him in these verses, where did Jesus go? You realize that when Jesus left this man, he's still blind. Where'd he go? Well, I was blind, but I saw him go this way. What kind of response is he going to accurately give? Why would you ask the blind man which direction he went? I don't know. I received sight after he left, after I went to this pool. He does not know where Jesus went, but he knows what Jesus does. You see, when everybody else around says, what happened to this man? Jesus asks the question, what can we do for him? And that's the difference in response when it comes to Jesus' response and when it comes to the world's response. So many times we ask, well, what happened? But not very often do we ask, what can we do? And when it comes to our response to brokenness, the response of Jesus that should echo in the chambers of our life should be, what can I do? Because the difficulties in our life and the difficulties in the lives of the people around us that seem to break us, just little tiny snaps in the condition of our life, are the display floor for God's glory. What would it look like, friends? What would it look like if we embrace the opportunity to step into brokenness instead of around? What would it look like if we stepped in to our friend's life, that their marriage is falling apart? And instead of seeing the inconvenience of the time that those conversations and those visits might take, what would it look like to step in and to be there and to be present? What would it look like to have conversations and stand next to our buddy that just lost his job and is too afraid to tell his wife, where we step into the brokenness instead of stepping around it and say, oh, you got this? What would it look like to sit next to the friend or individual that we know that just received the diagnosis, and instead of stepping around and saying, oh, my thoughts and prayers are with you, what would it look like if we stepped in and sat next to them and say, I'm present and I'm here? Where we embrace the brokenness that's around us as an opportunity where we very well could be the glory giver of Jesus to someone else's hurt. Where it wouldn't be a sign of weakness or immaturity, but it would be a sign of being a disciple of Jesus. And instead of asking what happened, we asked how we can help. Because in those moments, we are standing on the display floor for God's beauty. Isaiah chapter 61. Isaiah chapter 61, these words reveal to us the character and the nature of God all the way back in the Old Testament. And back in Isaiah chapter 61, there's There are these words of God, and it's not these words of God where it says, I have come for those who are pristine and have everything put together, and I have come to give great victory to those who work really hard and have big houses and have everything taken care of. And I have not, he doesn't communicate that message. Isaiah chapter 61, beginning in verse 1, it says this, the Spirit of the sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to provide those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. You see, the brokenness in our lives and the brokenness in other lives are the display floor for God's beauty and his power. So I learned after starting to buy these willow trees for Emily that each of them has a character name or a meaning. I didn't know that. I'm not a willow tree guy. But Emily, she let me on to this information. We have some that have to do with marriage and kids and everything like this. But this broken one, the title of this broken one is love. And not in a physical way can we relate. But I think on a lot of levels, when it comes to us as individuals and when it comes to us in our relationship with Jesus, we can relate to this fractured figurine. See, because every day, most of us, we wake up and we see ourselves in this fractured, broken state. We know our struggles, we know our difficulties, we know our silent addictions and maybe our more public ones. We know our areas of brokenness that maybe others know and maybe others don't. And every morning we wake up and we think to ourselves, looking at all of our brokenness, and it might not be conditional to the world, it might be spiritual, where our relationship with Jesus seems distant, even though we've grown up in church for years. We see our brokenness, and we think to ourselves, how on earth could I possibly be loved by God? We see how our pride has about tanked our marriage, where we've not loved our spouse the way that we know we should because we don't want to be wrong. We see our brokenness. And we think, how on earth could God possibly love me? And we might not want to admit it. We're probably not going to raise our hands this morning, but we can relate to broken love, can't we? I know what I've done. I know what I continue to do. I know what I'm known for, or what I used to be known for. How on earth could God possibly love me? Because I'm so broken. But friends, the truth of this morning is that if we were perfect and we were not in pieces, then Jesus would have had no reason to come. But it was because we sit in this condition that Jesus came and stood on the display floor of life. And he didn't just say, I'm going to put the pieces back together again. He didn't just say, oh, well, we'll fix this. He said, with my blood on a cross, I'm going to put the pieces of your life back together again. I'm going to take the brokenness and the shame of your life, and I'm going to put you back together again. I'm going to mold you, and I'm going to craft you, even in your brokenness, into a beautiful creation once again. Friends, if we would have been perfect, then there would have been no need for moments like this. but because you and I, because we live broken, sinful lives, Jesus stepped out of the perfect heaven and onto the display floor of the earth. And as he hung on a cross, he looked down and he saw the pieces of us. And he said, with my hands I commit everything I am to putting you back together again. Because when we are put back together again, and when we can step into others' lives the way that Jesus has stepped into ours, we begin to show love in a way that it's never been seen before. It's a way that this blind man understood it. It's a way that the lepers understood it. It's a way that the woman caught in adultery, she understood it. It's a way that dead Lazarus understood it. And it's a way that you and I, through the cross of Jesus, are offered life to understand it. You see, the brokenness in our lives is the display floor for God's power and beauty. Why don't we go ahead and stand together? We're going to worship, and we're going to sing a song that I don't know if there's a song that could communicate exactly what today's message said. So many times we have this idea that I've got to have everything figured out and then I can come to church. I've got to clean up my act and then I can come to Jesus. I've kind of got to fit my pieces back together again and then I can come to Jesus. Then I can give my life to Jesus. After I give myself kind of, then that's when I can come to Jesus. And you know what Jesus says? He says, come to me when you're weary. Come to me when you're burdened. Come to me when you're broken. Come to me from wherever you're at. Because I've already taken that brokenness and I put it on my shoulders. And this morning, some of us, as we're going to sing, we recognize that I'm sitting in the brokenness. I am the brokenness. And I need Jesus to help put these pieces back together in my life. And maybe this morning as we worship, as I'm hanging out off to the side over here, you just come over and say, Matt, I got to get these pieces back together again. I'm living in the broken and I'm missing out on the hope of Jesus. Maybe for some of us that means giving our life to Jesus and getting baptized and saying, I'm in. I need these pieces put back together again. And maybe for some of us as we worship this morning, as we sing these words that come from wherever you're at. My pride has kept me away from this close relationship with Jesus. My pride has kept me away from my spouse the way that I should be. And my pride, living life about me, has kept me away from where Jesus wants me to be. And so maybe this morning as we worship, it's a conversation with you and Jesus right where you stand. God, I've created some of my brokenness. Love me to love others the way that you've called me to. Because our brokenness, our pieces, are the display floor for God to work his power and beauty. This morning the question is, will we let him? Let's sing together.